And I want to talk about forms of support or evidence that you can use for arguments. And different kinds. Some of this you will have figured out because you're not stupid. In fact, you're smart. Some of this may be a little new and different, but as usual with all the things that I come up with, I usually come up with a reasonably complete list. You know, you might have thought of some of them, but not all of them. And the first thing I want to say is that when you're presenting a new matter argument, okay, you should have a title for the argument. You should explain it and include, obviously, the logic and reasoning part. Then it would be nice if you had 2 bits of evidence or forms of support. And it would be nice if they were different, right? Don't use 2 current events or 2 quotations from Churchill or whatever, right? Use 2 forms of support. Now, this is not true for refuting arguments. I think for refuting arguments, usually you can just have logic and reasoning, whatever. But when you're building arguments, you need to have some support. Quite often we have 0 or 1 down here, and it would be really nice if we had 2. And of course, the whole purpose of this is to indicate that these are elements from reality, and thus reality actually syncs with our argument. Instead of just like, I'm here saying this, and then here's a couple of things that support it. And even if the audience or the judges may think that the argument you're making is okay, it helps them accept it in a more vigorous way, to more strongly accept it if you have some evidence. Okay? Here we go. Some of these are better than others. Let's talk about current events. Okay, something happening now that proves your point. And you look for this by saying, okay, what are other current events that are analogous? We're talking about a state for Kurdistan, right? Well, where else are there self-determination movements? What's happened? How has that worked out? Have they been violent? Have they not been? How have neighbors reacted? Right? And so you think of analogous current events that might support it. If it's, you know, a country deciding to get rid of nuclear weapons, how many countries have ever decided to forswear nuclear weapons?
To what? I'm sorry?
How many countries have decided to forswear nuclear weapons? So, you know,
one. Japan. No.
I would say
They never have
Two. Okay. South Africa had them and got rid of them at the end of apartheid. Yeah, they had a nuclear test over the Indian Ocean. I remember seeing Walter Cronkite report on it. So they, as when the ANC came into power, they gave them up, renounced them, disassembled them, and Libya had an active nuclear weapons program and took it apart and said, no, we're not going to do it. So, you know, there's an example of where you can say, well, here's two countries that have done it. Did anything bad happen to them? Right? Did they survive? No. In fact, South Africa, Libya was welcomed back into the world community when they decided to do that. In South Africa, there was like rejoicing. Right? So you have to think about that. Now, I said current events, but the next category I want to talk about are less recent but relevant events, things that have happened in like the last 10 years, 10 or 15 years, probably since the fall of communism. That's not a bad, you know, marker in history. There are a couple of markers in history you would look at. The fall of communism, 89-90 would be one. 9/11 would probably be another, right? And so you know, China getting nuclear weapons might be another in the 60s. So you sort of think about things that happened in a particular age, and that's a little more difficult for you. You're younger, you didn't live through that, but that's why, you know, all you poli-sci majors need to try to focus on not so current events that are still part of the modern world that you can use to prove your arguments. Next category, expert opinion. Somebody who knows something agrees with you. Right? And you can't just say, there's really this smart woman and she agrees with me, she says. You need to know the name. You need to know who that person is. And then something that they've said or why that's important. Right? Now for the qualification, you may not know that she teaches at Swarthmore or that whatever, but you might know that she wrote a very famous book on the Holocaust or something, right? And so this is an instance of where whatever you read or assimilate, you want to try to keep on hand even after you've taken the test so that you can use it in a debate. This type of stuff is very useful for things like prediction, right? People are predicting what's going to happen, causation, one thing leads to another, an explanation, right? Or an on-balance judgment and evaluation. On balance, free trade has been bad or good, or agricultural subsidies, or whatever, for some kind of expert opinion. Next category, quotation. A quotation. Some famous person or somebody has said something. Okay? And these are the kind of things that you might develop a very short library of. I remember my dear departed friend from Dartmouth, Bob Branham, used to have a quotation, I forget who it's from, hurrah for the status quo. Right, and he would jokingly use that. Here's another sample. H.L. Mencken said, for every complex problem, there is a solution that's clear, simple, and wrong. Right, and that's a pretty good quotation. I don't think you can use that in every debate, but you know, I bet you could use it once a tournament pretty well, and I want to thank Sam Press for that one. Lucas.
Are quotations really evidence, or are they more just like little like sprinkles? You know what I'm saying?
You know, I think if you need one, you can throw one in. You know, and that's what I'm saying. You know, it's like who was it? Winston Churchill said, "What I learned from Hitler was never to invade Russia when the winter's coming." You know, and so like, you know, that kind of thing, and. Or, you know, Nietzsche says, that which does not kill us only makes us stronger. You know, these are the kinds of things that, and they're kind of like homilies, but the more familiar they are to people, the more stock they put in them. Studies on the persuasive values of, you know, cultural aphorisms, a stitch in time saves 9, Rome wasn't built in a day, all of that. Well, the studies show that most audiences accept, they go, yep, that's right. And they'll go, yep, that's right. It takes a long time to do this kind of stuff. They won't go, oh, yeah, how long did it take to build Rome? No, they'll just take it for what its general meaning is, and it's thought to be fairly persuasive. Okay, now sometimes the quotation might be very specific. Right? And sometimes it might be general, but it is something that you can use. Statistics. Statistics. Data that supports your argument. Now, we don't assume that you're going to memorize lots of statistics, but what you need to know is the flow of statistics, right? Which way are they moving? Okay? Birth rates in Europe? Down. Okay? Birth rates in Russia, more or less down than Europe? More down. Okay. Value of the dollar?
Way down.
Way down.
Record low?
I think so, against the euro at least.
Against the euro, record low. Okay. So you don't need to know that it's $1.35 for a euro, right? But you do know that it's plunging. Okay. Cash reserves. All right, number one currency that countries keep for their cash reserves. These are primarily countries that sell a lot of oil or have a lot of exports. China, OPEC countries, Russia.
US dollar.
Okay. US dollar is number one. What's 2?
Euro.
Euro. What's 3?
Pound?
Yen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, right, yeah.
Okay, pound is 4. Okay, see, these are the kind of statistics you need to know, not precise things, all right? And so, number of people in the United States,
30 million.
approximately. Percentage of U.S. population living in poverty.
A lot.
15.
No, higher than that.
So if you weren't really sure, you'd probably give a range.
Too much.
Okay,
Well-
too many. All right, can you be more specific with that line?
18%-ish.
Almost, I would say almost
15 to
20.
I was gonna say
Almost 20%, right? It's not 20% because I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure that's the right range. Okay, and so you kind of need to know this kind of stuff. Percentage of the Indian population that lives in cities.
High.
In,
India.
75.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
80.
No.
0.
Isn't it more
No, in fact,
rural?
it's reversed.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Really?
It's more living in the villages. Yeah,
Yeah,
It's so small.
No,
It's
it's a
about
rural
India
country.
is small.
No, I'm saying relative to the population that it has.
It's pretty big. And
I mean,
most
considering the
live in
population
villages.
density is like astronomical.
Well,
right?
not
They
necessarily.
have high
They have a
population
billion
density,
people
but
and-
not a whole
They have
lot
a
of
billion
cities.
people, but they're all in villages, one after another, right? Scattered through the countryside. So that's all right. Number of people who watch the World Cup.
that's like the
Not
majority of the world.
Billions.
I would say, yeah.
Make a guess.
1.5 billion.
3.4 actually.
What?
Yeah.
I don't even know how many people have TVs.
Right, yeah.
Oh, well, that's another thing, right? How many people have TVs? And so these are the kinds of things you don't need to know precise statistics, but you need to know some range and to be able to phrase it authoritatively. Now, I just want to say that as a representative of the University of Vermont, you must never lie in a debate. This is the one thing that can actually get you thrown off the spot. Lying about stuff. Now, that's why I'm saying, don't be so 13.4%. Because a lot of times the lie sounds more compelling if you're precise. You know what I mean? And I don't want you to do that. We don't want you to do that. Okay? So, and if you, and now what does that mean? I'm sure that Sam's going to ask, what does that mean? If you're pretty sure it's not true, then don't say it. If you think it's true, and, lying is, knowingly falsifying information. And that's what you can't do. Okay? You might say, I believe that, and say something that you believe to be true, but don't say anything you don't believe to be true. Same.
What do you do if somebody else is lying about statistics, but you don't have the counter statistic to prove
Well,
it?
you won't have the counter statistics. And I think you can say things like, I don't know what newspaper he's been reading, right? Or what crystal ball he's been consulting, but I don't believe those numbers are accurate at all. Right? You can't just go, gosh. Right? But you can't call him a liar either. That's the one thing you can't do. I'm not, you'd say, I'm not sure about those statistics. In all my reading, what I've learned is that, upwards towards 20% of Americans live in poverty. Not the 3% that you're claiming, or the 60% you're claiming. And if your counterclaim seems more reasonable than theirs, the judge will go with you. Right? And especially, you're not saying, look, I know, dude, you're lying. Say, well, I try to be a well-read individual, and all the information that I've seen indicates that your figures are kind of off base there. I think X might be a more accurate estimation. Okay? An empirical study. This is a case study. You take a case study that proves your point. This is quite often useful as a way to build your model. A way to build your model, okay? The case study. Now, let's think about it. We want to legalize marijuana. All right, what's some place who's done it?
California.
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam. Okay. We would take. Yeah, that California is not legalized now.
But they
Decriminalized.
decriminalized
It's different.
in the
Right.
70s.
It's quite different.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately.
Okay, you can't walk into the coffee shop and look at the menu and order what kinds you want like you can in Amsterdam. By the way, Amsterdam is changed their mind and they're doing away with the selling of
Shrooms, right?
psychedelic mushrooms.
The dried ones, which are the only
Yeah.
really good ones.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're taking a case study, right, and say, well, if we want to look at how to successfully legalize marijuana, Amsterdam's a good example, right? It's controlled by the state. It has to be supplied by licensed growers. It has the places that sell it are government regulated by license. You can only buy a certain amount, and they can have different kinds, but they have to educate you about what it's about, okay? And they won't sell to children, right? And so you have a lot of specifics built in, and what happens? Well, it seems to work okay. People get stoned, but they don't seem to cause too much trouble, at least while I was there, unless they were Brits who had also been drinking too much. I didn't say Irish, I said Brits. See you, Derek. And so that's the way you can build that and say they don't have to enforce the law against it. It's not it's reduced crime because you don't have a black market, etc., etc. Now, how do you go about indicting a case study like that? How do you go about indicting a case study? Why? You're not saying we're going to legalize marijuana, we're going to use the Amsterdam model. Joe.
Well, not all situations are akin to what's going on in Amsterdam right now.
Why is Amsterdam unique?
Because what's happening in, the Netherlands is entirely different political situation than, say, the United States.
It's a different political system, so you would say there would be a different political reaction in other countries.
Different culture, different demographics, different
culture,
people would use different laws,
demographics.
other
Right,
drugs.
right. Holland, for example, is probably the most tolerant country in the world.
So you can't use that as an example of any country,
Right. And that's why they're the first to legalize marijuana, probably because they are the most tolerant country in the world, as opposed to,
you could also say something like, they've got legalized prostitution there as well. How do you think that right-wing conservatives in the South of the United States would handle that?
Right. They like prostitutes, but not legal ones.
Right.
Right. Okay. So yeah. All right. You can say it's different. There are critical differences to where it's being applied that make a difference. Also, it's a tiny country. You could argue it's fairly homogeneous, right? Not as much as it used to be, because they're accepting huge numbers of immigrants.
Right.
So, you can make these arguments against it, and when you do that, you have to say how it's different and why that makes a difference. You can't just say it's different, right? You can't say like Joe did, well, there are different things going on in the Netherlands now.
Right. Yeah.
Right? You have to talk about the difference and why that makes a difference, right? And so here the difference would be that, they have the most tolerant attitudes in the world. They don't have a very active right wing, right? They take a unique approach to all victimless crimes, whether it's heroin or prostitution. Yeah?
Isn't that true with any case study that you use?
Yeah.
That's
what I'm saying.
Is it like a useful technique still?
Oh yeah, it's really useful because when they say no, bad things are going to happen, it didn't happen in Holland. If you say marijuana leads to harder drugs, it didn't lead. In fact, harder drug use went down.
Right.
Right, and so it allows you to answer back a bunch of things by saying it didn't happen in X. Yeah.
Do scientific studies fall into this category, or are they all their own?
Sure. Give me an example.
They tested how abstinence-only sex ed programs worked or didn't.
Yeah, right. And that was just recently publicized that abstinence-only sex education programs. Totally. Did you read that story in 7 days? They had a really good story about Unitarian Universalist Church has this very specific sex education program that gives children factually correct information, and they found that in the comprehensive sex ed program that students had started having sex at a later date. They were far more likely to use condoms and birth control. They were much more knowledgeable about getting tested. They were able to talk to other people about it. Right? Yeah. But what we're saying, you need some kind of, it's empirical. Right? It's empirical. Okay? Now, kind of like it, but not really, is the analogy or the comparison. The analogy or the comparison. Your point is very much like something else. Therefore, what's true of something else is also going to be true of the point you're making. Okay? And you need to be aware that there are two kinds of analogies. There are literal analogies, where you're comparing two things that are the same. The British Empire with the German Empire, right? And there's a figurative analogy where you're comparing things that are completely different. My love is like a red, red rose, right? And figurative analogies work really well in poetry and music and things like that, but they don't necessarily work well in reasoning. I will say, however, that there's a divide here between Eastern and Western culture. Eastern culture is more willing to accept, the figurative analogies that, if we discipline you in a certain way, then you'll act like a hurt puppy, and we'll discipline the spirit out of you, and you will, right? See what I mean? Or just like a flower, when part of you is clipped, when you clip it, that will increase growth in other parts of the plant, right? And compare that to a social phenomenon or a person or whatever, okay? So you have to be very careful about that. And you have, in order for this to work, you have to say, no, there are powerful reasons why they're analogous, right? They're both empires. They're both based on colonialism, under mercantilism. They're both based on establishing puppet colonial governments. They're both overseas empires. They're both took place during the early parts of the industrial age. See what I mean? That there are lots of commonalities, and so that's how you defend it. You have to say that your analogy is comparative. Now, your figurative analogy can be used more for rhetorical flourish at the end, right? It's just like it works in poetry, it works in song, it can work in argument, but it illustrates your argument. It doesn't strongly support your argument, right? It illustrates it. And in the debate we had about Darfur, right? You and Ethan used the Kitty Genovese story about how she was murdered on the street and people heard it and knew it was happening and nobody came to her rescue. That's kind of a figurative analogy, right? She screamed for help, nobody came, they knew it was happening, but nobody did anything. And now are you going to do the same as regards Darfur? Okay? And so it works well rhetorically, but don't rely on it for argumentative power. Next, personal testimony. Say what happened to you. Right? Say what happened to you. And, it's not, and I know that you might be a little concerned about this, that, well, how can my experience, well, it's real. You were there. You knew about it. Right? If you were told, when you were told, for example, that your mother had cancer, you had a feeling, and it was profound and meaningful. And you could talk about, you can then identify, you can't know, but you can identify with other people's feelings when that happens. Okay? Let's say you're talking about suicide, right, and the tragedy of suicide. And if you had someone that you knew who committed suicide, you can say, you know, I've been in that experience and it's truly traumatic. Far more people are hurt than just the person who does. All the people around them and who love them, etc., etc. Right? So a lot of this comes from common experience, whether it's, you know, child abuse, or when your mama spanked you, or, you know, when you had a teacher you didn't like, or, you know, but it needs to be fairly relevant. It needs to be in a strongly analogous situation. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but then it becomes more rhetorical, right? There's a free trade debate I saw where Mark Whitmore from St. Andrews stands up and talks about, you know, I was an overweight, it was about trade blocks, right? And he was against forming trade blocks. And he was like, you know, I was an overweight child and everybody made fun of me and they wouldn't allow me to enter in their little friendship cliques, and that really hurt me. And, you know, I've since lost a lot of weight and I'm better and more socially adjusted, but that really hurt me. And that's very much like what's going to happen to the nations who are left out of these trade blocks. They're going to feel rejected, they're going to be angry, they're going to be bitter. Right? And so, of course, it was personal testimony, you know, but, you know, and, you know, I can give personal testimony about being fat, you know, and what that means, and when you sit down on chairs and they shatter under you, you know, and Madeline can probably talk about what it means to be small, I can talk about what it means to be big, you know, and all the rest of you can talk about the tragedy of being a man in America. Yes?
And of course, it would be inappropriate to tell something in the first person that didn't, in fact, occur to you.
Yeah, you wouldn't lie about, yeah, when my mother committed suicide, that was like...
Well, let's say, like, it happened to someone close to you and it just works better than that.
Okay, then, no,
Okay.
you shouldn't do that. That would be a lie.
That's the lie.
So let's go to the next one.
I just wanted to
Let's go to the
say
next one. It's either a lie or it's not.
Yeah.
And who knows whether it's a lie?
You.
You do,
person
yes.
telling it,
You, the person saying it. So it's not like... Okay, then, don't worry, Sam, you have the narrative. You can tell a story about another person to support your argument, right? You can tell the story about, you know, Kitty Genovese, or about, you know, prostitutes in South Africa, or about, and narratives have really more argumentative power than most people give them credit for. In fact, the studies show that people really will listen to a little story. Now, it can't be a long story, but it needs to be fairly short. But people will listen to it and give validity to it, right? And that's because narrative is probably one of the oldest forms of argument we have, right? Telling stories around the campfire when we were glad to have caught some critter and thrown it in, you know, and then we got something to eat, and now we're telling a story about the narrative about that 6 months when we never did kill anything and how hungry we were, and, you know, so it has a lot of power that we're not really related to. And there are lots of things like this. I'm not sure you can use all of them in a debate, but the best way to get people to bond with each other is to get them together and have them make food together and then eat it. I don't think the potluck really does it. You know, I always prefer the group stir fry where people chop the vegetables together, and then, you know, you have 3 different woks with different, one has meat, one has tofu, one just vegetables, and they're different spiciness. And then, you know, there are powerful things we can use. Don't forget that you're a critter, right? We're a part of nature, as Lucas was telling me. Okay, so you can tell a narrative. Like the others, you know, it has to be analogous. The less analogous it is, then the more likely it is to have rhetorical force, but not argumentative force. Next, historical example. An event in history supports your point. Well, this assumes you have to know history, right, enough to use it, which is a problem in America because we live in a largely ahistorical society. We think that history began with
me.
When you were born? Yeah, and previously we thought that history sort of began when America began, right, instead of far before that. once again, it needs to be an analogous situation. And what can give something power is if you say a number of historical examples. We don't understand the nature of technological change. For example, in the late 19th century, it was thought that the crisis facing U.S. cities that they couldn't overcome was the crisis of animal manure. Because we were using animals to haul carts and ride horses and stuff, and there were so many people in New York and Chicago and Baltimore and Philadelphia that they just couldn't get the manure out of there fast enough. And so we thought there was a manure crisis coming, the likes of which we could never imagine. But of course, the car, the internal combustion engine, changed all that. And maybe that could happen with other things. I mean, you can talk about how, alliances tend to lead to war, right? When you have alliances and then they're arrayed against each other, then they're just waiting for something to happen, whether it's war with Germany and Japan, the First World War, the Franco-Prussian War, and in these kind of instances from history, the more analogous and the more numbers you have, make it better. But there's another wonderful thing. It makes you look smart. It makes you look smart, so they might want to actually believe you, yes.
How much room is there in historical interpretation? For instance, like if I say in a debate that we dropped the atomic bomb to end World War II, that may have not really been the case, but it's a vastly,
It did end World War II.
Well, yeah, but
I mean, some
people say that like it was for nuclear diplomacy more so than
against the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there are a number of different interpretations to history, as long as you're not saying one that you believe to be totally false. For example, I believe, was this in my class or in a debate in here? Somebody said that we fought the Civil War to end slavery. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Then why were we several years into the war before the Emancipation Proclamation happened? Mm-hmm. It was to preserve the Union. It had very little to do when it was thought that promising freedom to the slaves would undermine the Southern economy. Then it was the thing to go. That was just a tactic, right? So I would never claim that we fought the Civil War to end slavery. Now, if I was poorly informed, I might make that argument. Right, but as a judge, I'm like, But I wouldn't say, you lied. Right, I would understand that the person probably believes that. Okay, so there's much, of all the things, history probably is one of those that you can interpret the most. Of course, with the notion that history is written by
the winners.
The winners, yeah, exactly. And so they always,
rich white man,
put it together that way. Yes.
Should you stick to references you're fairly sure everyone is familiar with? You know what I'm saying?
No, I think if you know it, if you've got it, flaunt it.
Yeah.
That's if I was talking about a newscast on CNN, then yeah, you would only use what. But this is a contest of intelligence, and so if you've got it, flaunt it. Right. Don't be afraid to show that you're smart. And sometimes, even if it's not necessarily vital for your argument or whatever, it helps for you to show you're smart. I know a lot of stuff. And our boy here, I guess I shouldn't call him boy, our young man, Armand, he knows a ton of stuff. He can't necessarily figure out how to use it, right? But he's got it, and he'll flaunt it, and he may not, and he may give two examples in 3 or 4 minutes that contradict each other, but they're good pieces of information. And so I'm going to encourage him to go ahead and explore that, right? And so, people know different kinds of stuff and more stuff, and I think it just helps to show you're smart, because the judges want to vote for the smart people. That's why this self-effacing stuff doesn't work. Well, I don't really know much about it. the Sam Ricker, well, I don't really know anything about that period of history, so I'm not even going to answer you. Right? Instead of saying, show me it's relevant in an argument and I'll knock it down. Which is kind of the same way, I don't really
know what the hell you're talking about.
and I don't speak again, so I won't be able to knock it down, but I'm sure my partner will. See what I mean? The self-effacing stuff doesn't. And let's see, who else is bad about that? Madeline can be a little self-effacing. Once she gets going, she's okay. But at the beginning and end of her speech, like, well, I'm going. Now, Danielle was like this, and she's getting better. Right? She's getting better. Once she gets going, she sounds better. So stop being so honest. Of course, you don't want to lie, but that doesn't mean you want to be honest about my argument is bad, my knowledge is inadequate. Right? There's a difference between there's lies of commission and lies of omission. Right? As you might have known, if you've ever been unfaithful in a relationship, some things you never want to bring up with Paul, because you don't want to have to lie and say, no, absolutely not. Right? You just hope it doesn't come up. All right? So I think deception of omission is fine. I don't need to tell you I'm dumb. Right? You may find that out anyway, but okay, does that make things straight?
Do you think that that women are more I don't know.
Yes.
Than men in general?
Well, yes, in their communication, and they have to be. I'll just give you a couple of examples. We'll go back to persuasion class here. Women doctors get more compliance of patients by telling them to do things because it would be good for them, right? And male doctors get more compliance by saying, if you don't do this, you're going to die early. Right? They get more compliance with being harsh. But I think debate culture is a little different. I think you shouldn't. I don't think you need to be. I think you need to be strong and certain and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, if you look at the testimony of a lot of women who have been successful in very high-profile, situations, they'll generally say, yeah, I have to know more than the guys, I have to be harder than the guys, I have to be better than the guys. And that's, I remember the woman who was the first director of the Korean broadcasting ever, and she was saying, yeah, boy, they're all just waiting for me to make a mistake, and I have to be tough. And we were at a panel discussion, and women asked her, you're probably the most high-ranking woman in Korean society, which is fairly patriarchal. How do you do that? And she said, I'm better than the guys at what the guys do. I'm not telling you to shirk your femininity or whatever, because I don't think you can't just shirk your gender. It's there. But I think you want to be certain. In a debate setting, certainly, you want to be certain and confident. Visualization. Visualization. You paint a word picture and have the audience imagine that they're in that picture. This can be a pretty good one, right? What if you were waiting, what if the Janjaweed came to your village and murdered your parents and chased you away, and you walked 300 miles through the desert, and you'd be pretty angry and pretty upset and whatever, right? I think I'm trivializing this example. But there's something powerful about putting, someone else and taking someone and putting them in someone else's shoes. And especially that's true when the other side is saying we should do X or Y. And you'd say, well, you're in favor of that. Would you like to have X or Y done to you? Right? And then, so that's not what I'm talking about, but it is the visualization technique. And the studies show it's very good for understanding, right? Because people will fill in their blanks. Okay, if I was there, if I heard this woman screaming for help outside, what would I do? If I was there, would I say, well, I don't want to get involved, or would I go help, or would I call the police, or, and so people, when they put themselves in a situation, go through the options and then identify which one they think would be best. Now, hopefully, you've thought ahead and you're putting them in a situation where you know what their choice will be, and that choice will be consistent with what you're arguing. Finally, we have commonly accepted ideas, something everybody believes. And I'm not so much talking about aphorisms here, and about ideas that are, pretty central. People are motivated by what?
Self-interest.
Self-interest, be more specific.
Money.
Money. Power. Ego. Sex. Some people might even be motivated by altruism.
Whoa.
And so if you're making arguments, I think it is evidence to say, well, the people are going to comply with our proposal. It's in their economic self-interest. People are motivated by money, and it's going to work. Right? And so you can use that to prove a lot of arguments. So there are some things that, and what are some other accepted parts of the conventional wisdom?
That it's wrong to kill people.
Wrong to kill people. Killing people to show killing people is wrong is wrong.
That's not such a commonly held belief, though.
No. It depends on if we need their organs. Okay? Right? There's a myth of progress, that things are always getting better. Right?
Prisons deter people.
That technology solves problems.
Yeah, what about commonly held wrong beliefs?
Like what?
Like prisons deter criminals.
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah, they don't. But that's what everyone thinks they do.
Yeah, I know.
So
you have to, if you can use that, it's harder if that prisoners don't stop and say, here's what they do. People are logical, or in many cases, logical risk determiners. Okay? What's the percentage that I'm going to get caught? What's the percentage that I'm going to be prosecuted? What's the percentage that I'm going to be convicted? And then what kind of sentence am I likely to get? And generally, when you have several percentages in a row, the final one's pretty small, right? Which explains why prisons don't deter. But you can say, criminals don't want to go to prison if they know we're going to get tough. They're not going to commit crimes.
They're not going to.
You can say that. You can say that, and I think that has some logical force to it. But you can logically decant that one as well. Okay.
That implies that people are rational, though. And people aren't rational; they're rationalizing.
People are rational in some situations. Right? I think it's very situational.
Yeah.
You're rational about if you don't have a lot of money and you need a new car you're going to be fairly rational about what to do about your car. But when you come home and the main squeeze is in bed with the neighbor, hope there ain't a gun around, right? So, there are different states of mind, and when people stop to think about things, they tend to be fairly rational. When they don't, let's join now. The war will be over by Christmas. It will be glorious, and I'll get a medal. Right? Sorry, I'm just prepping for my peace speech I'm giving in Malaysia. Okay, so there are these commonly accepted ideas. Myth of progress, myth of technology. More of something means better. Right? More is better. Oh, we're not secure, so we need more military.
Surgeon, please.
Right? But that might actually not be true. Right? It can make people more fearful and afraid of us, which means they oppose us more, and we, So, just to conclude, it was nice to see Shane Clark write back about Ivan Illich, and because he's into this concept of keywords. There are many contradictions in our society, and keywords exist to stop us from considering that, right? And keywords are always something that you think is either always good or always bad. but it's not true, and it tends to hide the contradiction. Okay? So if I tell you, would you like more prosperity? You go, yeah, I want more prosperity. Right? Does that mean things are better off if you have more prosperity?
More prosperity, less inequality.
Well, no, not
Let's have them both.
necessarily.
No, I'm saying like that's what people say, but that doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Also, there, and do think, and if you think about it, surveys of what makes people happy consistently show people are happy by friendships, family, social relationships, a meaningful sense that their work is achieving a good thing, right? This is what people say make them happy, but there's this myth that money makes you happy, shiny car makes you happy. I learned that fairly early when I would say, I need this toy. I'm trying to have this toy for Christmas. I won't be happy with it. And then I get that toy, and then like 3 or 4 days later, I'm like,
I want the next one.
and so I figured that out by the time I was about 13 or 14. There's a big lie in our society. So national security is a key word. Democracy is a key word. Education, is a key word. What's a better key word than education? That might be true. Learning.
Information.
Right? Well, if you learn, that's good. Yeah, information. I have access to information. You want access to information? No. Right? But will you actually know more or be able to do more if you have access to more information? Not necessarily.
The ignorance of the United States.
So you just need to be aware of these commonly accepted ideas and how often they're false. But when you use them, I'm not going to necessarily accuse you of lying. Okay, if you say that, prosperity is good, I'm not going to throw you off the debate team. Because you and I both know it's not necessarily good. Okay?
If you say something like prosperity is good in the debate, even though you don't know it's good, but you have to... I don't think you're lying. I think lying is very specific when you go, John F. Kennedy was killed by aliens. Right. So if you know that kind of like a keyword concept or something may not necessarily be true, but it might win you the debate, should you go with that?
Yeah, I think you can go with it. I mean, it happens all the time in debates about national security, economic policy. I have another lecture I'll get to at some point about what is the current conventional wisdom, right, and how you debate about it. That's why I think reading The Economist is good, because that is the conventional wisdom. There ain't a radical thought in that mag. And I look forward to introducing more radical thoughts into world's format debate as time goes on. Joe.
Well, using keywords like prosperity, I mean, it's not like it's bad. It's not like prosperity is a bad thing. I mean, at times it may be, but...
Yeah. Right. I'm not going to throw you off the debate team for making this up. It's not lying.
Yeah, it's like creating more wealth in a community isn't... it
doesn't have to have a negative effect just because it can.
Yeah, it can and often does. Doesn't mean it has to. Right. And if you think people are motivated by it, then
it's like if people are starving and you give them money to buy food, it's like
that's a good thing.
You feed a man a fish,
and they spend it on, and they gamble and they buy lottery
tickets.
Right,
exactly. Well, yeah, so right.
The other side of the coin.
Yeah.
People who are asking for a handout and you give them $1, what do they do with it?
Buy a porno magazine.
I think they buy cheap wine.
Yeah.
Buy those
you can have a
reports.
lot more fun with a big bottle of
Those menthol cigarettes.
Each to their own.
Exactly.
Now you might really enjoy your porn.
Hey.
It's probably better if you're living out on the street.
Hopefully, I won't be living on the street.
Sir.
Where does philosophy fit into all this?
Where does philosophy fit into this? That would be famous philosopher, insert quotation and concept here.
I think you can put it anywhere, really.
Yeah.
Figurative analogy.
Yeah.
You know, Confucius, like
Expert
Everything I
opinion.
say is philosophy.
Expert
Yeah.
opinion.
So,
Most of
makes sense. I'm reading
Confucian
anything.
homilies have become accepted aphorisms, right? I mean, but and I think that it can be a powerful form of evidence of expert opinion. If you're talking about Rawls' view of justice,
Yeah.
you know, Rawlsian justice, you know, if you're talking about, you know, Locke versus Rousseau, I mean, there are different, you know, ways to, and when you flash these people's names and you're accurate about depicting their theories, that makes you look smart. And it's really cool when you know their first name. Locke's first name?
Thomas.
Rousseau?
Jean-Jacques.
Jean-Jacques. Very good.
JJR.
Nietzsche?
One of my favorites. Frederick.
Frederick.
Right, it really helps when you know their first name. Right?
But you probably shouldn't just refer to them as first name, like
Freddie.
Renee.
Freddie
Frederickson.
No, I think
Freddie Ann.
I
Freddie
think,
Ann.
therefore I am.
Like a Z.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you for attending.
Thank you.